Okay, so I'm back with another quick installment here of kind of the next phase of the poem. Last time I addressed the concepts of begin it where warm waters halt, take it in the canyon down, not far but too far to walk. And I talked about the Madison Junction, I talked about putting into the Madison River, where I believe Forrest Fenn did when he was talking about doing so in the preface of the book Too Far to Walk, where he got the title for that book, and how going back and doing that trip, he'd always promised himself he was going to do that because that trip cemented his connection with that place, but he never did that trip again. And for him now, it's just too far to walk. He said that was a metaphor, really, for his whole life. But it also, he was referencing a specific place. He was referencing the stretch of water that I've got highlighted on your screen right now. The next clue after that. So if you begin it where warm waters halt, which again I'm just totally guessing, hypothesizing that is in the beginning of the Madison River, over here where we talked about the Fire Hole and the Gibbon Rivers halt. They stop, and the Madison River begins. And then you take that in the canyon down, and we looked at that canyon, going down the Madison River, going down this Madison Canyon, and going over, to the end of that canyon, coming out over there to the same place where it appears that Forrest got into the river. You take that, you go not far but too far to walk, where he says he got out at Baker's Hole. And then from there, you would go, well, who knows where you go, because he says not far but too far to walk, put in below the home of Brown. Right? So this is where everybody, and I mean everybody that I've heard talk about this potential solve, or that have followed basically what I've told you so far, talk about Hebgen Lake as being the home of Brown, because the trout live their lives there basically, and then they come up into the Madison River to spawn. There's even a plaque about that at Baker's Hole that says that that's what the trout do. That is not my home of Brown. My home of Brown is different, and it's not based on brown trout. My home of Brown, if you've seen or read some of my other stuff, my home of Brown comes from the Thrill of the Chase book. It comes from the chapter Bessie and Me. And I think that when he says the home of Brown, he's talking about a barn, because he's talking about his brown cow that he loved. And in the chapter Bessie and Me, he talks about this Guernsey calf that grew up to be a beautiful fawn-colored animal that grew up to be a brown cow. It's a Guernsey cow. And so he talks about this. He talks about being in love with this cow. He talks twice about the barn that Bessie lived in. Okay, the barn is the home of the cow. It's the home of Bessie. And there's a lot of things we could go into about Bessie and the tie between Bessie, Brown Bessie. It's very likely that this was named after a very famous singer when Fenn was a child, named Bessie Brown. The Brown Bess was a very well-known gun, well predating Fenn's time. He has a picture of him with, here with his family. This is what I'm thinking of. He and Bessie in the middle. You can see that he's capitalized Skippy, June, me, not me, and Bessie. He capitalizes Bessie, right? So when he's talking about her, if he's relating it to this brown cow, there's a possibility that's what he's talking about, and that it's a barn. Okay, so if it's not Hebgen Lake, and if I think that the home of Brown is a barn, well, where does that get us, on this solve? Well, and actually gets us to a very specific place on the river, the Madison River, between where he would have put in and where he got out. This section where he spent 3 days, and he says he had a really strong connection with that area, and it's a place he never specifically mentions, but it's a place with which he would have been super familiar, and it's called Barnes Hole. The reason it's called Barnes Hole is because it's the site of where there used to be barns on the riverside of the Madison. And if anyone's ever been over there, you can see the wagon tracks through here still, and if you go there, you can actually find some of the ruins of the structures that used to be the barns. Now, Forrest has said none of the clues are associated with the structure, okay? And the way that I think this fits in is that there are no barns here anymore, and that it's not actually associated with the structure. I think the home of Brown is Barnes Hole, which is here. This is Barnes Hole 1. Sorry, you can't see that. Let me mark it for you. Barnes Hole 1 is here, and it's a very well-known fishing area. It's actually a world-renowned fishing area because when those trout come up from Hebgen Lake, that's where they come up to spawn in the fall, and this place gets just thick with fishermen. I mean, thick. They have a local tradition of waiting in line, and you fish upstream, you go downstream, and you just wait your turn, and you go down the river. Sound familiar? The cats that he milked from Bessie would just wait their turn. They would just wait there while he gave them their milk. Anyways, I don't want to get crazy about this, but when I was looking at this and I came across the idea that there's a place called Barnes right here, because I'd read the chapter on Bessie and I thought, boy, that's weird. He's really making a big deal out of this, right? So if this is the home of Brown, because that's where the barns used to be, that changes things, right? I've got a couple of pictures here I can show you. This is a stage that's leaving from those old barns. Actually, this is from Riverside, very close to where that was. There's an area just upstream from Barnes Hole 1 here called Cable Car, and that was an area where I can actually mark that for you for that was. They had a cable that went across the river, and they had a little car that they could put stuff in and tow it back and forth across the river by a team of horses. Not been able to find any pictures of that, and I haven't been able to find any information. If anybody's got anything, let me know, because I would be super curious to know. But I've got a couple other things here I can show you. This is the closest. This is the actual picture of the horse barns. I believe this is circa 1911, from what I was able to find. This comes from the Utah State Historical Society. But those barns used to be in this area here, okay? So if Bessie is the Brown that he's talking about, and he capitalizes it because he is specifically naming her, and the home of Brown is a barn, and he's referring possibly through that connection to Barnes Hole, which is here, that explains why people maybe have figured out the first couple of clues but went right on past the treasure because they went over to Hebgen Lake thinking that was the home of Brown. So they figured out the first couple of clues, and they go way down over here by the dam or something, or they go to Quake Lake or something way over here, not realizing that the home of Brown was well before that it was actually something way back here on the river by Barnes Hole. Now, I have no idea if this is correct, but some interesting things happen if you put in below the home of Brown. Well, what would be the put in below the home of Brown? If Barnes Holes 1 or 2 are, this home of Brown, where would you put in below this? Does that mean to the south? Does it mean that you would put in here on this Barnes Hole 2? He says one day when Bessie was further in the barn, Maybe you drive farther down Barnes Hole Road. I don't know. Maybe the put in below the home of Brown is down here where he got out at Baker's Hole, because that's the first place you could really put in below that Barnes Hole area. This is the next place you can get in. Well, that's very interesting, isn't it? Because there's lots of areas around here that would be potential hiding places for the treasure chest. This area here is actually outside of Yellowstone National Park. This is in the Gallatin National Forest that he had a map of when he was looking for Lewis and Clark. This is not part of Yellowstone. Some very interesting things happen once you get down here. So, when I tell people that I have a Yellowstone solve and they roll their eyes at me, I understand that. But now you know why I do, and you've got a picture or an idea of what I think may be the home of Brown. And I'm very curious to know your thoughts on it. So please leave them below, ask your questions, point out all the errors or flaws that I'm missing. I look forward to reading them. Thanks.